Hi everyone, this is a video on how to create objects and turn them into symbols and then add some interactivity to the project. So first I'm going to grab rectangle tool over on the right hand side here and we'll draw that in. Hit my selection tool. So for any object that I create on the stage here, a corresponding circle shows up on layer 1 here, and so for every object that I want to move on the stage, that object will need to be converted to a movie clip and be placed on its own layer. So right now I have just a basic object. I need to go to modify, convert to symbol. We could just leave it at symbol 1 and hit OK. When you convert it to a symbol, it has a light blue line around it, and you'll notice over in the properties inspector on the right, there's an area that's called instance name. If I want to communicate with this rectangle, I need to put in a name. You'll also see down here in the layer that nothing really has changed other than the black circle still exists in that first frame. If we want to move this and animate it along the timeline, we need to turn this into a motion tween. And by default, if I were to click and select, right click and select create motion tween, it automatically gives me 24 frames along this timeline of a motion graphic. Now, the playback head is at the end here, and there's no dot here. So for any animation to go from point A to point B, you need dots, which are called keyframes. And right now I have my initial keyframe at 1, but there's nothing here at the end. So all you have to do is left click and drag your object and move it, and then you'll see you get the next keyframe. Now this object is essentially a container, and it's containing our green original object. So a movie clip can be considered a container. Right now I've got this movie clip on the stage with a motion tween here, and this is called, up here in the upper left, scene 1. So this is the main scene. If I want to go inside this rectangle and do some additional things to it, all I have to do is double click, left double click, and I go into that container, and you'll notice that the timeline changes here. So this would be considered child of the parent, scene 1. So just for the fact that we're inside this container, we would consider it a child, and the parent would be, if I click on the scene, would be the main scene here in its timeline. So again, I can double click on any object, and as I say, this was some signage. I could always put on some additional objects on their own layer within this timeline. For instance, perhaps a oval, and they're both still just objects. They're not even movie clips yet. If I want to move this one on its own timeline, I would have to convert that to a movie clip. So I go to convert, modify, convert to symbol, hit OK, and then if I right click, create motion tween, now I can perhaps rotate this. So if I click on the motion tween down here and I go to the upper right under the properties, I could type in maybe 2 rotations over time. So now you can see my oval between point A here and point B rotates. Now, in layer 1, my rectangle shows up, but if I move my playback head just to the right 1, you'll see that my oval shows up here, but my rectangle only shows up on that first frame. So if I want to have that rectangle show throughout the 24 frames, I would just click on that cell and hit F5, and that will put the rectangle in at every frame so that it appears along that timeline. Now I'm still inside symbol 1. I'm still in the child. So I'm working on a completely different timeline than I was when I first started. To go back out to the main scene or the parent, you click up here in the upper left, and now you're back out to the main scene. Now the oval isn't rotating. It's not going to be allowed to rotate until we actually test this movie. So even though I've got some animation here, if I double click on this entire symbol movie clip, I do have another child animation on the inside. So if I go back to scene 1 and I hit Command Return to test this movie, now you can see that it actually works. So you actually have to test the movie when you are using other timelines or children that have some motion to it. So that's a quick video on motion tweening and creating animations within movie clips, which we call children. So right now this is the parent. I'm on the main scene. If I double click on it, now I'm inside that container, and I've created another movie clip of an oval that rotates as such. I'll go out to the main scene. Now the other thing that we need to talk about is making something interactive. So if I'll go out to the main scene and I click on a new layer, I could make this layer and call it script. Maybe click on layer 1 and just create one more layer for another object. I could take the rectangle here and put it out along the base, and then maybe grab another element and put that perhaps up here. Now for this object up here to communicate with this base, I would need to convert it to a movie clip. So I'm going to go to Modify, Convert to Symbol, Symbol 3, hit OK. Now that object is a movie clip, and if I want to communicate with the base, I need to convert that to a movie clip as well. So now they both are movie clips, and if you remember, in order to communicate with one another, they need to have an instance name. So I could call this one up here, just give it a name, instance 1, and perhaps the one down here is called instance 2. So now we go and start working with what we call JavaScript, or the actions window. So to get that, you need to go into Window, Actions, and this panel comes up, Actions panel. So I'm just going to double click on the word Actions here to close it out so I can see what's going on. So the way script works is, we can play with the playback head. We could tell it to stop, anywhere along this timeline as it moves. So if I wanted the timeline to just stop at frame 1, I would type action script to do so. If I want the animation to occur and then stop without having to continually replay, I would need to put a keyframe at the end here, which we would use the F6 on your keyboard. Now it's created what we call a blank keyframe. These dots down here with the black in them are called keyframes. The circles after hitting F6 are considered blank keyframes. However, on a blank keyframe or any keyframe in here, I could select that dot and then go to Actions and write some script to tell the playback head what to do. It's almost like a Word document where you can just type things in. So we're going to write some JavaScript, and it's really not that difficult. You just go this dot stop, left parentheses, right parentheses, semicolon. That's going to stop our timeline from looping. I'm going to hit return. Now if I want to communicate with the object up at the top here called instance 1 with the one down here, let's say our base is invisible. It doesn't exist right away. So I could say, let's set the visibility of instance 2 to false right from the get-go. So I could come down here under my actions, open that up. Remember we did the this dot stop, and I could say something like this dot instance 2.visible is equal to false. Now that's going to, right when the playback head starts moving and it gets to the end, it's going to turn off that green. So let's take a look at the timeline. Right now, the playback head moves and it gets to the action script. So what you'll see is the ground will be there, and then when it hits this action script or this JavaScript here, it's going to stop there, and then it's going to turn off instance 2. So let's see what that looks like. There it goes. Now this oval keeps moving because we never went inside the child to tell that timeline to turn off. So we can get to that in a minute. But when the playback head gets to the end here and the base turns invisible, we could tell this object at the top to say, you know, when we click on it, to turn our base back to visible is equal to true. So let's go back to our script and let's write that. So I could say something like this dot instance one dot add event listener dot left parentheses click close quotation marks comma space mic click, and I just made that up, dot bind in parentheses this right parentheses semicolon. So in here I'm just saying, hey, instance 1, that object, I want you to listen up. You know, if you were to memorize this word right here, you'd be able to do a lot of things as far as interactivity. And then in the parentheses, the furthest parentheses, I want to do the event, the actual event, which is a click. And then I'm going to create a function called mic click, which I just made up. And then this is just typical JavaScript that we use on something, a line of code like this. So everything here is what you need as far as having that object listen to you. Next, we come down and then go to function, and the function's mic click because that's what I declared in the line above. I'll go left parentheses, right parentheses, and then left brace return. So I want to run mic click. What is mic click? Well, it's all going to be what happens here in the function between the braces. So this, then I'll say this dot instance 2 dot visible is equal to true, semicolon. So that should do it. Let's test it out. So if I hit return, it turns off down here. I'm going to come up. If I click, it turns it back on. This is still moving though. So let's close it out. And maybe what we can do is, in addition to clicking on this, perhaps, if we click on this, we could, you know, even stop that oval on its own timeline. I think what we'll do though is let's go back to this main movie and let's double click on it, and let's add a layer there. We'll call that script. So you can put scripts pretty much anywhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this oval animation right here at the beginning. So if I go to actions again, I can type in this dot stop again, left parentheses, right parentheses, semicolon, and that's going to stop the movement. So if I hit command return and play this, the oval's not moving. This still works, but the oval has stopped. That's because we told it to stop here inside this movie clip, right? And, okay, so if I go back out to the timeline and let's take a look at the script along the main scene here. If I open this up, if I want to play the instance name of that oval, I could do that in here as well. So if I click on instance 1, which is this instance 1, I could target this movie clip as well. Right now I can turn this on, but I could also target this one. Well, if I click on this object, I never did put an instance name on it, so let's just call this instance 3. Now it's got a name, so I can communicate with that object. So if I go back to the main scene here and turn on actions, I could, on the next line, I could say, and now I'm targeting the instance3's timeline, the child. So I have to, if I go this dot instance3 dot go to and play 2, it's going to target instance3's timeline. That's the child. If I left this out and said this dot go to and play 2, it would target the main scene here that we're looking at here. It would just jump to frame 2 and go. Well, we don't want that. We want to target instance3's timeline and go to 2, because right now if we look at and go in, we have a stop here, and once the playback head goes, the oval will start to move. So it stopped here, and then what we say is go to and play 2, and it plays 2 and goes all the way to the end. Let me go back out to the main scene on the timeline here, and let's look at the action script again. So if I click on that upper object, it's going to set the base to true, which we already know it works, and then we're also going to target instance3's timeline. So let's try that. Command return, everything's going, that turned off. I want to turn it back on, so I click on this, but when I click on this, this will come on and our oval will start to rotate. So I'm going to left click, and there you go. Now it went all the way to the end of the timeline and looped back and then stopped again. That's what we wanted it to do. So that's how that works. So let's close that out. Let's come back to the timeline, go to the end of the action script here. And if we close that out, what else could we do here? Well, what if this, let's say you have one of your buildings and you click on the building and like this green object or some signage pops up. When that sign comes up, you might want to just click on that object again to have it go away. So that's instance 2, remember, there's the lower base piece. So we would want to maybe put some code on that box. So let's go back to the main scene at the end where the timeline is. Let's open up the actions, and we'll need to write another line of code. So we need to turn that box on so it listens to what we want it to do once we click on it. So we'll go this dot instance 2 dot add event listener, left parentheses in quotation marks, click, comma, space. Let's go mic click 2 dot bind this right parentheses semicolon. See, now we've got 2 lines and 2 objects that are listening for us to do something. Now I go to function, mic click 2. Now I have to do number 2 because I can't duplicate this. You know, I did it here, but I couldn't do that here. So you can't double up on functions under the same name. So, you know, every time you start this coding, you do have to create a different function name. So if I come down to function here, might click 2, left parentheses, right parentheses, and then space left brace return, we'd want to say, right, so when we click on that instance 2, we want to have it go back to false. So it's this dot instance 2 dot visible is equal to false. You'll see that some text changes color because it's relative to JavaScript. Certain things in black, like the function, will remain black. So let's try that. Command return. All right, there it goes away. We told it to. But if I click on this, it will go on, and this does spin, and it comes back and then stops. Now if we just added the new code to say, hey green bar, listen up. I called it instance 2. If I click on you, let's go, the function would be go to false, and there it goes. So you could, what I'm looking for is to have your buildings be something that's clickable with an instance name, and then create some additional objects like a sign that can you know, disappear perhaps right away, and then when you click on your building, it appears. So yours would probably be a little bit different than this here, perhaps when this is a building, let's say, or this object at the top, if you click on that, this shows. Well, in our timeline, I have the green box turning off at frame 24. So what I would need to do here is I would need to take this out, cut that, go to the main timeline, go to the first frame, and paste that in at that point. Then that green box at the bottom will go away right here at frame 1, and then I can turn it back on. So let's try that. Command return, green box is gone. That's what I told it to do right from the get-go. Now if I click on this, we still have the code there that turns it back on, and we still have the code there on frame 24 that if I click this, it goes off. So that's the basic idea of creating motion, working with more than one timeline. Versus it would be, the parents or scene 1 is the main timeline, and then anything inside another movie clip, like this one, has its own timeline. That would be a child. If I go back out to the main scene, this container, if I were to double click on this, it has its own timeline as well. If I go out to scene 1, our box. So, the nice thing is once you create objects, you can actually put some animated features, within that box, and then always come back out. So for instance, on this one that we did create, not only am I animating it here on the main timeline, but I'm also animating an oval here inside this box right here. So I double clicked and I went inside. You can kind of see up here where you're located. So I'm going to go back out to scene 1, and I think that's all you would really need to know. I'm not looking for mouse, over, mouse out kind of thing. I think if you just click on a building and have some information come up about that area, is the requirement for the assignment and project. So if you have any questions, email me. Thanks.